Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the session on the learning curve. We hope you're having a great festival so far, and we hope that you're going to enjoy having a bit of an interactive conversation with us today. As I've just mentioned in the chat, if you've just arrived, feel free to let us know where you're joining us from in the world, and maybe also a little bit about just where you're working. We're always quite keen to understand if we're talking to policymakers, researchers, change makers, academics, politicians. So always really useful to know who's in the room. So feel free to throw that in the chat. And welcome to everyone who's following live on, is it on YouTube, Robin? I think so. Anyway, welcome. My name's Brenton Caffin. I am the Executive Director of States of Change, which is an international NGO. That's on the website. There we go. An international NGO focusing on building the next generation of public innovation. And we're really, really excited to be part of the festival again. Unfortunately, sadly, we're not in Berlin like last year, but really pleased to be back and connected with the program. What we wanted to do today is just give you a little bit of an introduction to the project the initiative that we're working on with Climate KIC, and then we're going to pretty much move straight into doing a bit of an exercise together, because we're really interested in harvesting your insights and building those into the findings we've received from other workshops around the world. And then we'll come back and have a bit of a chance to sort of talk about what this all means and our collective reflections. And hopefully we'll get you out of here in time for the next session. So I wanted just to quickly sort of talk about where this project came about and what we're hoping to achieve. This year, it needn't be said, it's been a pretty strange year and a fairly tragic one in many parts of the world. We've learned an awful lot about epidemiology, social behaviour, new policy settings, and we've had to do so at a pace and a rate of change that we've rarely had to do before. As public servants, we've had to scramble not only to try and stabilise the situation, to mobilise people and resources and equipment, but also to understand the nature of the challenge that's facing us, and kind of very rapidly identify and test policy responses that actually help us to make, I guess, stabilise and improve the situation. This is a graph that was shown some months ago with a blog post called "The Hammer and the Dance," and we've all learned this language of flattening curves and what that entails. And my colleague Nicole, who's on the call, is joining us from Melbourne, who are just coming out of, or nearly at the end of a very extensive lockdown period to actually demonstrate what you can do when you combine policy settings and large-scale social adoption of new behaviours. And so, while on one hand this has been and continues to be a very tragic situation, on the other hand, it's actually quite optimistic insofar as we've started to learn a lot more about what we can achieve politically, policy-wise, when we commit ourselves to doing it, which got us thinking. There is another curve that we need to flatten. We've been talking about this curve for a lot longer, and yet somehow we haven't seemed to be able to muster or sustain the same degree of urgency or widespread social adoption or some of the policy settings that are going to help us to get there in terms of reducing our carbon footprint globally to try and keep our performance below limits that the planet can sustain. And so one of the things that, as States of Change, we're really interested in understanding sort of policymakers' behaviours and skills and attitudes, and how we can train public servants to be more effective experimenters and public problem solvers. And we saw lots of really encouraging behaviour during these last 6 months. And at the same time, there was this gnawing anxiety that there's a risk that we would sort of snap back to old behaviours, old ways of working, old policy settings. And frankly, we don't actually have enough, we don't have the time or the luxury as a planet to do that. And equally, we don't have time to wait until we have a vaccine and we have got past this critical phase of the coronavirus to get back to climate change. We actually need to learn how to chew gum and walk at the same time. And so with that in mind, we're talking with our colleagues at Climate KIC, who are really interested in capacity building and behaviour change, and sort of working with policymakers around the world to implement more effective strategies for climate change. And so we asked, is there something that we can learn from these last 6-9 months that may help us, may give people some guidance as to what are the transferable elements of what we've been doing for the last 6 months that we could deploy on our sort of decarbonisation efforts. And we sort of tried to break these down into these sort of 4 different areas. So on the one hand, what have we seen policymakers and leaders do over the last 6 to 9 months? What behaviours have they demonstrated? What skills have they had to deploy? What has been their attitudinal approach to policymaking over these last 6 months that may be of relevance for looking at climate change? What new policies have we trialed or developed during these periods? Everything from new forms of incentives to new restrictions to changes in the way that we fund certain activities. What new governance models or decision-making models have emerged during this period that's been able to help us to sustain both faster, more effective decision-making, but also maintaining the trust and the support of the public at large? And finally, what sorts of social practices and behaviours have we seen being adopted either by individuals, in workplaces, or in communities that may be, again, a useful tool in the fight against climate change? So what we wanted to do was to effectively ask lots of people, and we're running a series of workshops, including this one, to really try and hear from others what they've seen, what they've experienced, and what they feel may be transferable. And then we're going to take all of this and turn this into a framework that we can then actually share with policymakers to help them recognise where they have developed this muscle memory and how that muscle memory might best be redeployed. So rather than trying to teach them how to do something different, all we really want to do is to give them a framework to help them see what they've already learned. So that's basically what this project's all about. With your indulgence, I'd really like to encourage you. I've been seeing how many people we've got in the room. We've got 12 people in the room. We're going to shortly send you out into slightly smaller groups because we want to have a plurality of conversations. So we might send you out into maybe three or 4 groups. And we have a Miro board. I hope you have all had a chance to play with Miro. We've got 7 in the waiting room. Hang on, that's a shame. There we go. We've got more people coming. Welcome everyone who's just joined. Just explaining the nature of the project and what we're about to do in this workshop. In the chat, I am going to send a link to a Miro board. It's relatively self-explanatory and not too complicated. It's just effectively a collaboration whiteboard that we can use together to populate some questions. And what I'll do is I will just quickly share my screen so you can actually see what is on the mirror board, but effectively it's a replication of what you've just seen there. We have sort of 4 areas that we're really interested in getting your experience of what you've seen on those 4 areas. So skills and attitudes of policymakers, new policies, governance models, or sort of social practices. And we'd really just like you to grab a Post-it note, double click on it, write what you've seen, what you've observed that you feel might be transferable into the sort of climate change challenge. We are going to break you out into groups for about 15, maybe 20 minutes, somewhere in between 15 and 20 minutes. We'll see how quickly you can generate ideas. Feel free to be generative at this stage. Don't be overly sort of evaluative or critical. At this stage, we are just looking for volume. And later, when we get into the sort of insights phase, we'll be able to start to cluster these and think about different patterns we're seeing emerging. But right now, we're really just interested in seeing what you've observed. Is that clear? Are there any questions that anyone has before I send you off into groups? Feel free. It's a small enough group. You could take yourself off mute if you just got a question. If not, that's fine. I will just quickly set up some breakout rooms, and I might just stop sharing for a second. See what I'm doing. Breakout rooms. I'm going to send you into the room for about, say, about 15 minutes, maybe 20. If you have any questions, put your hand up or call out for help, and I will jump into your breakout room and see if I can help.
So I'm not sure there's any particular order. Then we need to do things.
I don't think so. I think in the brainstorming phase, it's pretty.
Yes, pretty wide.
Yeah.
All over the place. Some have already started. Okay.
Okay.
What inspires you? Behavior skills, practices, social practices, behaviors, governance, or policies?
I think I'm probably. I would probably start with one of the top 2.
Yeah. Okay. It's good for me. More practical. Yeah, I live in France, and definitely our leaders were a bit disappointing. Saying one thing and doing the opposite, not being consistent, not explaining the basis for the decisions. So lack of trust, lack of transparency. I can say a lot.
Oh yeah, okay. I'm from Germany, so I feel like we've had somewhat of a more coherent response than our neighbors.
But very local, right? Depending on the lender.
Yeah, that's true. But I think especially initially, there was more coordination from the national side as well, right? Like, so I think especially when the lockdown was being lifted, that was when things started to get a little bit more divergent and less coordinated. But yeah.
Behavior skills and attitudes. What in particular can I write down? Okay, the fact that the transparency of the reasons for the decisions must be explained. Also, yeah, they regularly change. The indicators, like the different thresholds and the indicators that they were measuring, and the colors on the maps that they were using, and so on and so on. So, in terms of tools, there wasn't much consistency. don't think they were well equipped. Sorry, I don't think they were well equipped in terms of managing the data that was coming from the bottom up. So data,
you mean in France?
Yeah, lack of data culture. Yeah, apparently it was a mess to gather the data on the ground, you know.
Okay.
And make sense of the data and have the consistent way of handling data across the country. So that's definitely a skill lacking, the data culture. Yeah.
I'm struggling a little bit to write things down, to be honest, because like my phone, like, or my laptop is
Okay. Do you want me to write something down for you?
I think I'll get it in time. It just takes some time, unfortunately.
Okay.
Also, the thing is about Germany, though, I have actually no idea why our numbers are so much lower than everyone around us, kind of. Because sure, there were some decisions that were being taken early on that were beneficial, but it kind of doesn't understand the curve that we've had.
Apparently, it could be linked to the way the cities are laid out, you know, the density of the cities. Because I think Berlin, for instance, is much less dense than Paris or London.
Ah, yeah, that could be.
And so it's spreading slower. And also we had super cluster events very early.
Yeah.
Like a religious gathering in Alsace. Perhaps you've heard of it. And this totally shot through the roof. Whereas if we didn't have these supercluster events at the beginning, I think the progression would have been much slower and much consistent. But it really spiked right away.
I mean, I think in Germany, technically it was starting with like a less vulnerable population, right? So that was initially a benefit that we had, but still it should have developed differently later on, and especially when the lockdown was being eased. It had some very uncharacteristic curves.
I'm adding one in terms of behaviors of policymakers and leaders. I think they need to accept and recognize their errors. You know, sometimes.
Yeah, definitely.
And not try to show that they're always right. It's not good.
Yeah, so kind of prioritizing.
If they took a decision and it wasn't the right decision, I mean, they should be able to recognize it and move on. But it helps building trust. Yeah. Admit errors. Okay. Do you want to move on to another cluster or?
Yeah, I'm actually like moving around a little bit because it just whatever sparks something right now.
I see new policies, housing the homeless. Yeah, that's quite interesting. Also, this happened in France where suddenly we had to find housing for homeless people, and hotels were used, and stuff happened that wouldn't have seemed feasible a few weeks earlier.
Was that a policy?
Was it? Yeah, locally, yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean the local councils, they decided on it, yeah, and they managed to do it, yeah.
It's interesting to see how much can be done if there is a willingness to do it.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Policies that have been tried out. Well, definitely in terms of remote work. I mean, they definitely eased and encouraged remote work. which was a struggle before.
How do you feel like that relates to the climate crisis?
Well, I think we're talking about the COVID now.
Okay, so it's not about, okay, because I just understood it as being, wait, what signals from our response apply to climate too?
Okay.
But
what signal? Oh, sorry. Yeah, the title. What signals from our response might apply to climate? Okay.
But I feel like, there's usually room for interpretation. Okay. I just like it.
But yeah, definitely, I think it's good for the planet if you do remote work, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's actually true because there was a lot less traffic.
Yeah, exactly.
Admittedly.
Yeah, there was a huge impact on the greenhouse emissions for the whole on the whole planet. Social practices and behaviors. Yeah, shopping locally. Yeah. Less trouble. Definitely solidarity.
Do you also hear this weird noise? Like a white noise signal?
No, I don't.
Okay, let me just plug in my thingy again. It's still there. Can you try plugging in and out your headset? Out and plugging it out and in?
I don't have a headset. Well, it's not plugged in.
Ah.
Do you want me to do it? Yeah, I can try it.
Sorry.
Better?
Hi.
No.
It's gone. One thing that I wanted to add for the individual practice is definitely also that I feel like there was more a sense of understanding the importance of kind of sacrificing some of the individual freedom for the greater collective good.
Yeah. Totally.
Oh my God.
Do you want me to write it down? Or
yeah, please. I'm just...
Okay.
I'm clicking on things and it makes weird symbols.
Okay, greater good. So I wrote sacrifice personal choices, but it's not correct, is it? For the greater good?
Yeah, personal freedom a little bit for the greater good is what I said, but yeah. Actually, I'm curious to see what the other people wrote. I'm going to have a quick look. There's an ominous C here. No idea what that means.
I'm adding something with the new policies that have been trialed or developed. There was in some universities or some instances they eased the IP policies to encourage open innovation.
Yeah, that's great. It's also like the efforts for the vaccine have sometimes been... Oh, do you know folding at home?
Yes.
I mean, that's a community effort, right? That could be...
Folding at home.
Yeah.
Open science.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not exactly sure how that can be transferred into.
Well, the thing is, it's easy to do with science because science is a public good, but it's
Yeah.
difficult to do with innovation and technology because there you have the market laws and you have economic interests. But open innovations tries to do that, you know, less patents and more like open license and stuff like that, open source. And this was even more visible during the crisis, and it's a good catalyst for collective intelligence and open innovation.
I have a semi-related question for you, because I just feel like, you know, we're going to have a little bit more time. Do you happen to feel like policymakers, because someone wrote, use the crisis as an opportunity, and I do feel like there was a window where people were more open to the idea of redesigning the structures of the status quo?
Yeah. Or
yeah, but I'm wondering.
Our president definitely, he said on TV that French president said on TV that things will change, and he will change, and he realized what errors may have made in the past or something like that. But well, we haven't seen much so far. But yeah, there was a collective conscience that things had to change. But it wasn't much more precise than that. So
yeah, I mean, like on the EU level, they wanted to push for this, what's it called? New green economy?
Green Deal?
Yeah.
Green Deal, I think, yeah.
I was just confused because that sounds a lot like the US American Green New Deal. So yeah, exactly. I was just not sure if that's the actual word.
That's the one. That's also a Green Deal.
I'm actually I'm just feeling like, you know, there was a sense of opportunity at the moment, but I'm not really sure, as you mentioned, if things have become more concrete or if there has been more support for it now, or if people are more tending towards, oh, well, you know, that sounds like a lot of work. Maybe let's not do that.
That's one thing, because if they want to put money into the economy to help with the recovery, the policymakers can decide to emphasize on the economy that is good for the planet and the green economy and so on. But I think he wanted to say something else. The French president, he wanted to say that for a very long time he's been trying to reduce the weight of the public services. You know, too many civil servants and hospitals are healthcare is costing too much and so on. And he realized that actually this is needed. You need to have a strong state. And I think that's what he meant, but perhaps I'm wrong. So this is a bit different than only the economic side of things.
Do you want to add that to governance models, perhaps, that there was a change in this?
Okay.
Oh, wow. Okay. There's a post-it that says whole of society approach and really large.
Welcome back, everyone. I know that was too brief, but looks like you've been very, very productive nonetheless, especially for those of you for whom this is quite early in the morning. So clearly you've had your coffee. What I thought we might do is just have a bit of a chance to, I guess, both collectively reflect on what people have put in there and give people an opportunity if they wanted to expand on any particular things that they've said. What I'll do is I'll share my screen again, so we're all looking at the same place, and you can keep going. So thank you very much for that. And I guess one of the things we're interested in this, as I say, we've run these a number of times, is both where similar things are said on multiple occasions and thus kind of helps us to identify patterns, but also when we get surprised and we hear some different things. So I mean, would anyone, so if we look at the behaviours and skills, is there anyone who'd like to maybe talk to something that they put up there? Just feel free to take yourself off of mute. It's a small enough group. I'm prepared to entertain a little chaos.
One point that we found as a group was that there was a sense of using the crisis as an opportunity. That was not my post-it, but I thought it rang true. And that is something that was very obvious with the coronavirus or with the COVID crisis, because it was something that, albeit invisible, was something that affected everyone. And there was a sense of urgency around that. That was something that led to a window of opportunity where there was more willingness to consider redesigning the current status quo and the processes surrounding that. But technically, a lot of these factors are true for the climate crisis as well.
Yep, absolutely.
And so this is a little bit of a parallel, but also a strong distinction of how we're handling these crises very differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. There are some similarities and then there are some differences. And this is, I guess, what we're quite interested in exploring in this project is, why is it that, the same urgency is there, the same impact on us is there, the same ability to measure is there, the same ability to compare performance is there, and yet somehow we're not quite able to get there. I guess, and we're quite interested, I guess, also thinking about what role policymakers, particularly those who may not see climate change as part of their day job, right? Just as we saw in COVID, people working in education department weren't necessarily part of the COVID response, but they had to think about the impact on their role and their system and their organizations. Similarly, can we start to think about how we can kind of help policymakers to see that, every part of government and their systems actually has a role to play on climate change, and to demonstrate where they have mobilized in ways, albeit on COVID, that we might be able to redeploy. Was there any other comments that people had on the behaviors, skills and attitudes? I'd like to expand.
Add a comment
Yes,
that perhaps is not on the board, but the fact that COVID does not build cars or burn coal. And that does, of course, have some kind of impact on the way policymakers see this or that.
Yes. Vested interest holding the current system in place is clearly very different on climate change than it is on COVID. What's been really interesting in certainly here in Australia and a number of countries is where people have actually they've tried to almost create a sort of dynamic where it's you either sort of are supporting the economy or you're supporting health, and actually people have been able to point out that you can't have an economy if you can't stabilize health. And again, I think there's an interesting parallel there about you can't have an economy without an environment and a planet. And I know these aren't new sort of statements, and people have been saying these forever. But again, we're just wondering whether there is an opportunity here to maybe even just reintroduce some of these themes now that people might be a little bit more receptive. Nils.
Can I say so?
Oh, sorry.
Great.
Nils
Okay.
and Simone.
Yeah, just real quick. So I'm just starting my economics PhD. Actually, I was the one who put up the use of crisis as an opportunity post-it, and I'm trying to design sort of like a behavioral experiment in terms of, do people react differently? Just how the brain works if you present something as an opportunity, as so something that's not sort of releasing stress, or and I'm actually trying to make the very same case for climate change if you use this as an economic opportunity. So for resource-rich countries diversifying into green economies, for example. And I'm wondering if any one of you has sort of any initial reactions to that, because I would believe there's no, I don't want to say platitude I've heard more often as during the course of the crisis, but I think it's something very prominent. It's something every sort of political leader, if they're smart, they're gonna sort of weave it into their agenda. And I'm really wondering how do our brains react to something if you frame it as an opportunity as opposed to, especially climate change is sort of like distributing damages or, or costs. Is that something that, is ideally transferable? So I'm literally trying to produce hard evidence on that, but I'm just wondering sort of what your reactions might be. Thanks.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. In Australia, and I'm going to come to you, Simone. In Australia, Roscano, who's an economist who did the Australian equivalent of the Stern Review in the UK on the impact of climate change, he's actually written a book called Superpower, which is exactly that. It's making the optimistic case for Australia to actually pivot from resources to a sort of green sort of industrial revolution, effectively. So it's an interesting, that's a positive framing that is starting to kind of land. Simone.
So, hello, I'm from the Netherlands, and we have a design agency. And what we see in the COVID, especially then, we see that global problems are for everyone. So also the climate change, and especially for policymakers, I think they had to be more empathic about their own environment and nature. So you see, as a creativity organization, we design thinking tools, also in the Miro app, especially in this COVID. And we think that we have to share intentions and visions together. So, and also locally and globally learn from each other. So, because everyone has the same problem. I don't think it's only the problem of policymakers, especially with the crisis also in, during this pandemic about not working. And I think that we have to be more open and creativity and explore more new ways of working. And I hope that will, because I don't know if we have much time.
Correct. and actually we don't have much time on this call either. So I'm going to move us on. So new policies that have been trialed or developed. Again, I mean, we'll read all of these at our leisure, but are there any that people wanted to speak to or point out, expand on? I mean, borrowing, that's been an interesting one. I mean, changing the conversation about debts and levels of finance. And actually we can find the money when we want to, which ties into a lot of work of modern monetary theory and Stephanie Kelton's work.
I feel like that's been so, that was my point. That's the sticking point in so many conversations I've had of people like, well, we just don't have the money for it. And that's just not true. Like, yes. So I think it's really powerful to see that happening at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, and tie that in with the green recovery. Actually, there's a lot there that we can do. Brilliant. Anything else people want to mention on that one? Otherwise, they're all relatively straightforward to understand. Okay, let's move on. Governance. Purpose over profit, new funding model, citizens' assemblies, mission-driven approaches. Yep, I mean, this is something that's come up quite a lot and just links to that last point that we've made. Is there anyone wanted to expand on any of the points they made here? If not, that's fine. I'm just conscious you've got another session to get to. Individual workplace or community social practices and behaviours. I mean, this has been quite interesting, isn't it? I mean, about voluntarily adopting social practices when we care enough about the topic, right? And we see it directly related to our personal safety and our well-being and the well-being of our communities. So lots of great ideas on here. Sharing of resources, shopping locally. I think people have really connected to a sense of their locality and their place, where they can and where they can get out. Sort of the care economy, solidarity. Again, this has come up in a few of these sessions. Testing like people's willingness to accept restrictions on their liberty. Again, it's we've had certain shibboleths about what we will and won't live with, and it's been quite interesting. Again, I'll pick on Melbourne. There's been a lot of in the commentariat that actually people won't wear this and they're getting frustrated, and they want to rebel. And actually, when they did the opinion polling, actually there was like 60 to 70, well, originally it was 70% support, 75 or therefore thereabouts % support of the restrictions. And even after 3 months of being locked down, it was still at 62%. So actually, I do think there's a really, again, there's a community muscle here that we maybe haven't exercised as much as we have in the past, or haven't been willing to try. And recognizing that we are probably going to have to give some things up, you know, in order to, you know, to pivot to sort of more sustainable behaviours, and actually maybe challenging our public to come with us a little bit more than we've thought before. But is there anything else that people wanted to mention on this one? Again, it's all relatively straightforward. I can, so it's always sometimes with post-it notes, we want to just sometimes
I'm interested
make sure that
in the small posts, what you mentioned there, but it's great work.
Yeah, this is really great.
Can I add something? Sorry.
Yes, of course,
Solidarity, care.
I was also thinking one thing that's not on there yet, but that I've at least observed in my circle of friends is that a lot of people who would probably usually consume as a pastime activity have cut down on that a lot. Basic necessities were most of the things that they would still be getting on an everyday basis. But all these kind of consumer goods that they know they don't necessarily need, there has been more awareness in prioritizing what, or just generally prioritization in terms of what is necessary and what is not. And that is definitely something that I see carrying forward into the climate crisis as well, right? Like that there is less consumerism in a way, just for the sake of consumerism.
I've just got reviewing mindless consumption.
Yes.
In the sense that it's kind of, you're doing it as a almost as a release, as an activity, rather than it's actually serves some particular utility. It's just, we're just doing it because we need to do something with our time. And actually we found that actually making sourdough is just as exciting, possibly more. Brilliant. Look, thank you very much.
If we could add on to that.
Yes, of course.
I think there's going to be a growing trend towards potentially deurbanization. Working from home just gives the opportunity to not be based in urban centers, and potentially using rural areas as a much more sustainable choice to work and live from, and potentially then having a much more equal distribution of economic opportunities throughout a region and not just based in city centers.
On that, I'd like to put in a protest immediately. This is the point with city centers is service. The point with rural areas is no service. It's that simple. City centers exist because people want service, and city centers that can give people service easily, accessibly, mainly on foot actually, are most successful also today. The city centers that are in trouble are the ones that have been built on car use and long distances, because that means that it's so very easy to go that long distance somewhere else. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. And this is going to be one of those challenges when we're trying to design a framework that actually sort of speaks to the breadth of different geographies and sort of the ways in which our cities work. I could think of differences between Australia and the US and Europe and Asia on many of these questions. So there aren't any, we're not designing here hard and fast rules, but what we are trying to identify is, are there particular patterns that may be beneficial that we can hitch a ride with? And if they're not, well, then we need to recognize that these may actually be working counterproductively. So yes, but thank you for jumping in there, Anders. Look, I am conscious we are done for time. So what I'm going to do finally is just let you know where we're going next, in case you are interested to hear what happens next. Let me just bring my screen up one last time. So where we are at the moment is we're harvesting. We've been running a series of these workshops, and I'll point out in a second that we also encourage others to run these workshops as well. This isn't just for us to do. It's a fairly simple set of questions. So we would really love if people wanted to run this with their teams, with their colleagues, or just take a little bit more time and think about it yourself rather than just the 20 minutes that I gave you now. You know, if you want a Miro board, we can give you one, but as you see, it's relatively straightforward. And from that, we want to sort of pull together all these findings and start to see if we can develop and codify a framework that actually helps policymakers to understand kind of what some of the levers that they might be able to pull that they hadn't pulled in the past, perhaps. Just trying to bring up the chat up to make sure I don't miss anything. Good. Oopsie, don't go over there. Then I can't see it. Do that. And now I can't move this. There we go. I can do that. So once we've got that framework, we will be testing it out, again, running a series of workshops to see if it actually is useful for people to think about what new muscle memories that they can see in their own locations and whether or not that inspires them to try some different responses. And then once we feel we've got confident that we have a framework to share more widely, we'll be putting that out there into the wider world. How you can get involved, as I said, feel free to run your own workshop and send us your answers. We've also put the sort of same questions into a survey, so you could just type in your answers. Nicole has just put the link in the chat. Same questions as before. As Nils did, if you are working on things that are related, we'd love to hear about it, and we'd love to sort of connect up as many initiatives as we can on this. So if you're working on something that you think is related and you'd like to tell us, please just share it with us. And if you'd like to just kind of stay in touch with this project, or indeed what we're doing more broadly on States of Change, feel free to sign up for updates on the project. And we send out a bi-weekly rather newsletter. So you can sign up at hello@statesofchange.org. And that, with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of festival. And yes, if you want to get in touch, please get in touch. Otherwise, I will. Thank you very much, and have a good morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.